Prior to the birth of my son, I held a lot of remorse for my lack of direction in life, leading up to and including my marriage to his father. His birth gave me a renewed sense of purpose and allowed me to shed and scatter old selves and ashes in a completely new way, even though, at times, they swirled in an aimless eddy. Pregnant, I lived derelict with my son's father in a camper van down by the Tamar River in England. It was a comically low point in my life in its cliche and irony. I had traveled so much already, placing my dad meticulously in bodies of water as a sacred ritual in his honor, that in my rush to replace him, I had married this toxic avenger that had me dwelling under a literal bridge like a common troll while massively pregnant. Van life had seemed so romanticizedly bohemian in its deviance, but had now turned delinquent. Boho was now decidedly hobo. My transmutation from a tramp to artist came in the rebuild of my life after leaving his father and returning to North America. In fact, I think most of the world tried their hand at transmutation during the pandemic of 2020, where most of the world was changing jobs, career courses, geographical locations, partnerships, etc. My focus was on changing states of being and perspectives. I leaned fully into motherhood and all that came with that. It introduced me to some career options, ones that I am exploring as I grow, but it was not my focus. My focus was on how to be better, which is vastly different in my neurodiverse mind from how to do better. I am acknowledging that this is a wave like functioning and ongoing performance rather than a singular expression of self. The nuance lies in the margins. You would have to be there to completely make sense of that. My son, dog, dad, and I made our way to the equator to do better there. I needed to recover in all aspects of self after leaving my marriage. I also wanted my son to have the best shot at transcending any trauma that might have taken root in his tiny lifespan. I thought that if I corrected it immediately, we stood a good chance at him never remembering that a seed was even planted. Ecuador wasn't a rash decision. I chose a place that had captivated my curiosity back when I was more whole, a full decade before my dad died and subsequently meeting my ex-husband. In the vein of artistic radical authenticity, there was some narcissism at play in my decisions to travel with my son after becoming a full-time single parent. I would like to offer an explanation that I hope will differentiate between healthy narcissism and one that is malignant and sinister in nature. I was keeping consistent with my life's ideologies and passions in that travel broadens the mind, enriches the soul, and resurrects the spirit. Good for all. I was traveling with my father's blessing by way of ashes, and so I knew that they represented a vital task unfinished. I was also keeping consistent with vows that I made to my husband regarding how we wanted to raise our children and all the wares. At that time, we had traveled to Costa Rica, Ireland, Portugal, Canada, so going to South America presented an exciting and even more culturally innovative option than the other places we had visited that were on the list. It quite literally afforded me the opportunity to lean farther into my healing without the setback of financial stress and duress. I see this as having been very efficient decision making. 2 blocks from the beach, we made our house a home, complete with an altar of ancestral offerings and crystals that had been carefully wrapped, packaged, and packed with the rest of our belongings. The house had everything you could want to manage in a beach town of dust, sand, and occasional monsoon rains. Simple concrete walls and tiled floor, 2 beds, and a refrigerator. With nobody knowing how long the pandemic would last, I bought a one-way ticket. I brought all the items my ex-husband and I had said we wanted to enjoy together as a family as well. Surfboard, skateboard, musical instruments, tools for carving, snorkel gear, art supplies, exotic cheeses, and Eastern spices. They were essential and extremely hard to find in that dusty fishing town on the coast of Manabee. It was not an easy feat for me to adapt to a new environment with a 2-year-old, 13-year-old dog, the shame of another failed relationship, and with the ever burdening bag of ashes. I could not metaphorically die enough there in my efforts to make sense of, or even differentiate between the inner and outer dis-ease. It was as if everything was so consistently foreign that it had started to feel familiar again, a snake eating its own tail in recurrent karmic loop. I was caught in a chaos spiral and was treating it like a slide rather than the cyclone that it actually was. To be a true artist one must constantly be able to shift perspective. I feel this to be true in my own personal expertise. To me, it was a slide. What does my son know of tornadoes, houses falling on wicked witches, and the man behind the curtain? The only lollipop kids he knew of were himself and his other candy craving classmates in the tiny Montessori public school he attended. I was raising a tiny human, and I wanted, nay, needed to help him make sense of his world, and in doing so, make sense of my own. I spent that time learning to love and trust myself once more. Even Merlin had no tether and was trusted to take himself on walks to and from the beach at will. We were all getting our individual needs met in wonderfully harmonious, well balanced ways, for the most part. After many days of self isolation, I would start to lose perspective, only to find that the cursory and depthless conversations that I engaged in yielded no insight as to life's ultimate purpose, nor how to unravel the mystery of self in relation to society, especially not a society and culture that was so foreign from my own. But healing is messy and nonlinear. I can attest to this. It was still a need that I was getting met, but not without some modicum of re traumatization. I sat with some complicated, nuanced differences between medicine and poison, which I firmly believe all things to be depending on the intention and context. I sat with some of my ex husband's oppressors with a very therapeutic outcome in mind. It looked different depending on perspective, but I trusted myself to go as far as I felt that I needed to go without getting lost in my objective. I sat in ceremony several times with a shamaness, and she, with the help of plant medicine, helped me facilitate meaningful conversations with the divine in regards to my necessary, albeit messy, methods of healing. I was assured that my path was correct and was still just as purposeful as ever, more so even, and made all the more impactful by my circumstance. I did not hesitate in that belief for a moment, even as it was impossible to see the forest for the trees. I nakedly expressed my desire for wisdom, and my prayers were answered. I was not going to question those answers that I worked so hard to seek. Besides, I needed that answer, for my sake as well as my son's.